Desperate for answers, Soviet engineers recovered a crashed Sabre, and what they found inside terrified them.
The year is 1951. In the frozen skies above the Yalu River, Soviet pilots are flying the most advanced fighter jet in the world. The MiG-15 climbs faster, flies higher, and carries cannons that can tear a bomber apart with a single hit. On paper, they should be winning. They should be dominating. But something impossible is happening. Soviet aces with dozens of World War II kills are being shot down by American pilots who, by all accounts, should not even be able to hit them. The kill ratio is climbing to 10-1. 10-1. And every night in the frozen bunkers of Manchuria, the same terrified question echoes through the corridors of Soviet intelligence. How are they doing it? How are American bullets finding targets that should be mathematically impossible to hit? The answer lies not in a secret weapon forged in the fires of Los Alamos. It lies in a cramped laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where a professor named Charles Stark Draper is about to solve a math problem that will change warfare forever. This is the story of the ghost in MiG Alley. To understand why the Soviet pilots were so confused, you need to understand the brutal physics of jet-age combat. In World War II, aircraft flew at 300 miles per hour. At that speed, a skilled pilot could look at an enemy plane, estimate how far ahead to aim, and pull the trigger. It was an art form. The best aces developed an instinct, a feel for the geometry of death. They called it Kentucky windage. You looked, you guessed, you fired. And if you were good, you hit. But the jet age changed everything. Suddenly, fighters were screaming through the sky at 600 miles per hour. Closing speeds reached 1,000 miles per hour. At those velocities, the human brain simply cannot process the information fast enough. By the time your eyes see the enemy, your brain calculates the angle, and your hand moves the stick. The target is already gone. It has moved hundreds of feet. Your bullets pass through empty air where a plane used to be. The Americans discovered this problem the hard way in the early months of the Korean War. Their pilots were some of the best in the world. Many were veterans of the Pacific and European theaters. They had killed German and Japanese pilots in propeller aircraft. But when they climbed into their new F-86 Sabres and engaged the MiG-15, they found themselves completely outclassed. The MiG could climb faster. It could fly higher. And worst of all, the American pilots could not hit it. They would line up a perfect shot, squeeze the trigger, and watch their tracers arc harmlessly behind the target. The MiG would simply pull up into the thin air where the Sabre could not follow, and the American pilot would be left staring at empty sky. The loss rates were becoming unacceptable. The brass in Washington were demanding answers, and the pilots were coming home with the same frustrated report. We can see them. We can chase them. But we cannot hit them. But everything was about to change because of a man nobody in the military was paying attention to. Charles Stark Draper was not a fighter pilot. He had never fired a gun in combat. He was a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a man who spent his days surrounded by equations and gyroscopes, not bombs and bullets. He wore thick glasses and spoke in the quiet, measured tones of an academic. To the generals who ran the war, he was invisible. Just another egghead in a lab coat. But Draper saw something that the generals missed. He understood that the problem was not the pilots. The problem was not the planes. The problem was mathematics. The human brain had reached its evolutionary limit. You could not train a man to calculate ballistics at Mach 0.9. It was like asking someone to catch a bullet with their bare hands. The physics simply did not allow it. Draper had been working on gyroscopes for years. During World War II, he had developed the Mark 14 Gunsight for the Navy, a system that helped anti-aircraft gunners track Japanese planes. But that was against propeller aircraft moving at 250 miles per hour. The jet age required something entirely new, something that had never been built before, something that would turn an average pilot into a sniper. And so, in the cramped quarters of MIT Instrumentation Laboratory, surrounded by spinning tops and oscilloscopes, Draper began to design what would become the most classified piece of equipment in the American arsenal. He called it the A-1 computing gunsight. The military would eventually designate it the A-4. But to the pilots who flew with it, it would become known by a simpler name: the Magic Eye. The concept behind Draper's invention sounds simple when you describe it, but in 1950 it was considered absolutely insane. Here is what Draper proposed. Instead of making the pilot calculate where to aim, let the machine do it. Build a computer into the gunsight. Feed it information about the target. Let it solve the math problem in real time and show the pilot exactly where to point the nose of his aircraft. The generals laughed. A computer in a fighter jet. Computers in 1950 filled entire rooms. They weighed tons. They required teams of technicians to operate. The idea of putting one in the cramped cockpit of an F-86 was ridiculous. Impossible. A waste of time and money. But Draper was not talking about a digital computer. He was talking about something far more elegant. An analog computer made of spinning metal and viscous fluid. The heart of his invention was a device called a floated integrating gyroscope. Imagine a small precision-machined spinning top suspended inside a can filled with thick oil. This fluid dampens the vibrations and shocks of a fighter jet pulling 6 Gs in a dogfight. It allows the gyro to sense the tiniest movements of the aircraft with absolute purity. When the pilot turns, the gyro feels it. When he climbs, the gyro knows. And here is the genius part. The gunsight does not just sit there passively, it moves. The crosshair, the aiming point, actually floats on the glass. When the pilot banks to follow a target, the gyroscopes feel the G-force and physically move the reticle away from the enemy plane. This seems insane. Why would you move the aiming point away from the target? But Draper understood human psychology. To get the reticle back onto the target, the pilot instinctively pulls the stick harder, turning the plane tighter. By chasing the floating dot, the pilot unknowingly forces his aircraft into the perfect lead angle. The machine is doing the calculus. The pilot is just following the bouncing ball. But there was one more piece missing, one more variable that had to be solved. Range. To calculate the perfect aiming solution, Draper's computer needed to know exactly how far away the target was. Not approximately. Exactly. Down to the foot. In World War II, pilots had to manually adjust a dial based on the wingspan of the enemy plane. It was slow and wildly inaccurate. But Draper had a solution for that too. Radar. A small radar unit mounted in the nose of the Sabre would automatically lock onto the target and feed the precise distance directly into the gyroscopic computer. The result was a closed-loop system of devastating lethality. The gyros measured the turn rate. The radar measured the distance. The computer calculated the exact point in empty space where the bullets and the target would meet. All the pilot had to do was fly his plane until the glowing orange diamond rested on the silver fuselage of the MiG. He did not have to lead. He did not have to guess. He just put the thing on the thing and pulled the trigger. When Draper first demonstrated a prototype to Air Force officials, they were skeptical. They watched the reticle dance across the glass following some invisible algorithm. It looked like witchcraft. One colonel reportedly asked if Draper was trying to replace American pilots with robots. Draper smiled and replied that he was trying to keep American pilots alive. The early tests were conducted in absolute secrecy. The Air Force was terrified that the Soviets would learn about the project and develop countermeasures. Pilots were briefed that the gunsight was more valuable than the aircraft itself. If they were shot down, they were to destroy the site before ejecting. Some pilots carried thermite grenades specifically for this purpose. They would rather burn alive than let the enemy capture the Magic Eye. The first operational tests took place in the skies over Korea in early 1951. A squadron of F-86 Sabres equipped with the new A-4 gunsight was deployed to Kimpo Air Base. The pilots had received only minimal training on the new system. Most of them did not fully understand how it worked. They just knew that instead of calculating lead angles in their heads, They were supposed to follow the floating Pipper. The results were immediate and shocking. On the first day of combat operations, a flight of 4 Sabres engaged a formation of 8 MiG-15s over the Yalu River. Using traditional gun sights, this would have been a desperate fight. The MiGs could climb away to safety at will, but with the A-4, everything changed. The American pilots dove on the formation. The MiGs broke hard, pulling into steep climbing turns, and the Sabres followed. The pilots watched in amazement as the orange reticle drifted smoothly across the glass, tracking the twisting, turning MiGs. When the dot settled on a target, they squeezed the trigger. The results were surgical. Short, precise bursts. Tight groupings. Kill after kill. 3 MiGs went down in that single engagement. The American pilots returned to base in a state of shock. They had never experienced anything like it. One pilot described it as playing a video game. Another said it felt like cheating. The kill ratios began to climb. Where before the Sabres had struggled to achieve parity with the superior MiG-15, they were now shooting down enemy aircraft at rates that seemed impossible. The Soviet pilots noticed immediately. Something was wrong. They were using the same tactics that had worked for years. Dive, shoot, climb to safety. But now, even when they were thousands of feet away, twisting and turning at the edge of a stall, the American bullets kept finding them. Precise, surgical, terrifying. They reported ghost bullets that seemed to curve through the air. They reported impossible shots from distances where the human eye could not possibly judge the lead. They started calling it the zone. An invisible sphere around every American Sabre. If you entered the zone, you died. It did not matter if you were faster. It did not matter if you could climb higher. In the zone, the Americans simply did not miss. The reports filtered back to Moscow. Stalin demanded answers. Soviet intelligence mobilized with a ferocity usually reserved for nuclear secrets. They had to find out what the Americans were doing. They had to capture the technology. They had to unlock the secret of MiG Alley. But they were looking in all the wrong places. They were searching for a superweapon, a guided missile, a radar-controlled autopilot. They had no idea that the answer was a spinning top suspended in oil designed by a professor who had never fired a shot in anger. And they had no idea how far behind they truly were. But this was only the beginning. The Soviets would eventually capture an intact A-4 gunsight. They would tear it apart, screw by screw. And what they found inside would not just explain the slaughter in MiG Alley. It would force them to confront a terrifying truth about the technological gap between East and West. A truth that would haunt them for the next 40 years. In Part 2, we will follow the Soviet intelligence teams as they drag a crashed Sabre out of the frozen mud and ship it to Moscow. We will watch their best engineers open the black box and discover a level of manufacturing precision that their entire industrial base cannot replicate. And we will see how the desperate attempt to copy American technology led to one of the greatest strategic failures in Soviet history. The race to steal the magic eye was about to begin. In Part 1, we watched as Dr. Charles Stark Draper created an impossible machine. A gyroscopic computer that could calculate the future. A device that turned average pilots into snipers. The A-4 gunsight was proving itself in the skies over Korea, racking up kills at ratios that defied explanation. Soviet pilots were dying by the dozens, unable to understand why their superior aircraft could not save them. But success in combat was only half the battle. Because while American pilots were dominating MiG Alley, a different war was being fought in the corridors of Washington. And this war threatened to destroy everything Draper had built. You see, the military brass had a problem. The A-4 gunsight was working too well, and that terrified them. The year is 1952. The Korean War is grinding into a bloody stalemate. Every month more young Americans are coming home in caskets. The public is growing restless. Politicians are demanding results. And in the Pentagon, generals are fighting over budgets like wolves over a carcass. Into this chaos walks Brigadier General Albert Boyd. Boyd is the chief of the Flight Test Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He is a man who flew experimental jets, when experimental jets had a habit of exploding. He has more test hours than any pilot in history. He is also a man who believes in tradition, and tradition says that fighter pilots win battles through skill, courage, and aggression, not through gadgets. When Boyd first sees the kill reports from Korea, he is suspicious. He reads the accounts of impossible shots from impossible angles. He sees pilots claiming kills at ranges that should be mathematically unachievable. And he smells a rat. These numbers are fabricated, he declares at a staff meeting. The pilots are exaggerating their kills to make themselves look good. Nobody can hit a target at 2,000 feet while pulling 5 Gs. It is physically impossible. Boyd orders an investigation. He wants proof that the A4 Gunsight actually works. He suspects that the success in Korea is due to poor Soviet training, not American technology, and he is not alone. Throughout the Air Force hierarchy, there is deep skepticism about Draper's invention. Many senior officers see it as a crutch, a device that will make pilots lazy, that will teach them to rely on machines instead of developing real skills. One colonel famously declared that the A4 would create a generation of button pushers, not warriors. The resistance reaches Draper's laboratory in Cambridge. Funding is threatened. The Air Force brass wants to redirect resources to more conventional weapons programs, bigger bombs, faster planes, things they can understand. Draper is summoned to Washington to defend his creation. He arrives at the Pentagon in his rumpled suit carrying a briefcase full of equations that nobody in the room can understand. The meeting does not go well. With respect, Dr. General Boyd says, his voice dripping with condescension, "I have been flying fighters since before you built your first slide rule, and I am telling you that no machine can replace a pilot's instinct." Draper tries to explain the physics. He talks about floated gyroscopes and radar ranging. He draws diagrams on a chalkboard. The generals stare at him with blank expressions. Finally, Boyd cuts him off. "We are not here to discuss theory," the general says. "We are here to discuss reality. And the reality is that your gadget is too expensive, too fragile, and too complicated for combat conditions. I am recommending that production be halted until we can conduct proper evaluation." Draper feels the floor drop out from under him. Months of work, thousands of hours of engineering, pilots who are alive because of his invention, all of it about to be swept away by bureaucratic inertia. But as he gathers his papers to leave, a voice speaks from the back of the room. "General, I think you should see something before you make that decision." The speaker is a young major named Chuck Yeager. The same Chuck Yeager who broke the sound barrier in 1947. The same Chuck Yeager who is considered the greatest test pilot in American history. Boyd turns surprised. Yeager rarely speaks at these meetings. He prefers to let his flying do the talking. But today, he has something to say. "I flew against the A4 last month," at Edwards. Yeager continues. "I was in an F-86 without the sight. My opponent had one. I am not a modest man, General. I know I am one of the best pilots in the world. And that kid with the Gunsight shot me down 3 times in one afternoon." The room goes silent. Yeager walks to the front, ignoring the stunned expressions. He turns to face Boyd directly. "I have flown against Japanese aces. I have flown against German aces. I have tested every fighter aircraft in the American arsenal. And I am telling you, sir, that the A4 is the most significant advancement in aerial combat since the invention of the airplane itself. It does not replace pilot skill. It multiplies it. Give a good pilot this sight and he becomes unstoppable." Boyd is shaken. He knows Yeager's reputation. The man does not exaggerate. If anything, he understates his own abilities. For Yeager to admit being beaten by a less experienced pilot is almost unthinkable. A compromise is reached. The Air Force will conduct an official evaluation, a head-to-head comparison between pilots using the A4 and pilots using conventional sights. If Draper's invention can prove itself under controlled conditions, production will continue. If it fails, the program dies. Draper has one chance, one test. Everything he has worked for comes down to this. The evaluation is scheduled for December 1952, at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Draper throws himself into preparation. The morning of the test dawns cold and clear. The Nevada desert stretches to the horizon in every direction. The sky is the deep blue of high altitude, perfect for aerial combat. At the edge of the runway, a group of generals and colonels gather around a portable radio station. They are here to watch the future of American air power be decided. Boyd is among them, arms crossed, expression skeptical. He has selected his best pilots for the evaluation. Men with thousands of hours of combat experience. Men who learned to shoot the old way with instinct and Kentucky windage. Against them, Draper has a squadron of younger pilots, most with less than 500 hours total. But they have the A4. The rules are simple. 2 teams of 4 aircraft each. They will engage in simulated combat over the desert. Gun cameras will record every shot. At the end of the day, the films will be analyzed to determine hits and kills. The aircraft taxi onto the runway. 8 F-86 Sabres identical in every way, except for the gunsights installed in 4 of them. The engines scream. The planes lift into the cold morning air. Within minutes, they are at 30,000 feet, circling like sharks. The engagement begins. Boyd's veterans dive on the younger pilots with the aggressive confidence of men who have killed before. They have numbers and experience on their side. They expect a quick victory. It does not happen. The first pass is inconclusive. Both sides maneuver, neither scoring clean hits. But on the second engagement, the A4 pilots begin to find their rhythm. A young lieutenant named James Robinson locks onto a veteran captain in a tight rolling scissors. The captain is pulling every trick he knows. Barrel rolls, high G reversals, snap changes of direction designed to throw off any aiming solution. Robinson follows the floating pipper on his gun sight. He does not try to calculate lead. He does not try to predict where the captain will be. He simply keeps the orange diamond centered on the silver fuselage. When it settles, he fires. A 2-second burst. The gun cameras record 47 rounds fired. Analysis will later show that 31 of them would have been hits. The captain, one of the most experienced pilots in the Air Force, has been killed by a pilot with less than a year of flight time. The engagement continues for 3 hours. By the end, the results are so lopsided that Boyd orders an immediate halt. His veterans have been decimated. The gun camera analysis shows a kill ratio of 8-to-1 in favor of the A4 pilots. But more shocking is the accuracy data. The conventional pilots are hitting their targets approximately 2% of the time, consistent with World War II statistics. The A4 pilots are hitting at nearly 25%. They are 12 times more accurate. Boyd stands at the edge of the runway as the planes land. His face is pale. He has spent his career believing that pilot skill was the ultimate factor in aerial combat. He has just watched that belief get shot down in flames. "Dr. Draper," he says quietly as the engineer approaches, "I owe you an apology. The production order is signed within a week. Every F-86 in Korea will be equipped with the A4 Gunsight. But implementation brings its own challenges. The factories in New York and Massachusetts gear up for mass production. But building the A4 is not like building a normal piece of military equipment. The floated gyroscopes require tolerances of 1/1,000,000th of an inch. The slightest impurity in the suspension fluid will cause the system to fail. The manufacturing process is more like watchmaking than heavy industry. Production bottlenecks appear immediately. Each unit takes days to assemble and calibrate. Quality control rejects nearly 30% of completed sites for failing to meet specifications. The Air Force needs hundreds of units. The factories can barely produce dozens per month. Meanwhile, the old guard in Korea resists the new technology. Squadron commanders who have been fighting for 2 years do not want some laboratory gadget telling them how to shoot. Many pilots receive their A4-equipped aircraft and immediately have maintenance crews disable the system. They cage the gyros, locking them in place, turning the advanced computer back into a simple crosshair. Draper receives reports of this resistance with growing frustration. He makes a decision that shocks his colleagues. He will go to Korea himself. He will train the pilots personally. He will show them what the machine can do. In February 1953, Charles Stark Draper, a 51-year-old professor who has never been closer to combat than a newspaper headline, arrives at Kimpo Air Base. The pilots regard him with suspicion. This soft-handed academic is going to teach them about combat. But Draper is not there to lecture. He is there to listen. He spends hours in debriefings learning how pilots actually use his invention in the chaos of real combat. He makes modifications on the spot, adjusting calibrations, tweaking sensitivities. He works 18-hour days sleeping on a cot in the maintenance hangar. And slowly the resistance crumbles. The pilots see that this strange professor genuinely cares about keeping them alive. They start to trust the technology. The kill ratios begin to climb even higher. Across the Yalu River, Soviet intelligence is growing desperate. Their pilots are reporting catastrophic losses. The tactics that worked for months are failing. Every time they engage the Americans, they are shot down with mechanical precision. The order comes directly from Moscow. Capture an American gunsight. At any cost. Special recovery teams begin racing to every downed Sabre, often under heavy fire, desperate to reach the wreckage before American bombers can destroy it. They are looking for the ghost in the machine. And in March 1953, they finally find it. A Sabre crash lands in shallow water near the coast. The pilot ejects safely, but the aircraft remains intact. Under cover of darkness, Soviet engineers drag the jet from the mud and ship it directly to Moscow. Inside the crate is an undamaged A-4 gunsight. The secret that has been killing Soviet pilots for 2 years is finally in their hands. But when they open the black box and examine its contents, they will discover something far more terrifying than a weapon. They will discover how far behind they truly are, and the revelation will haunt the Soviet military-industrial complex for the next 4 decades. In Part 3, we will follow the Soviet engineers as they attempt to reverse engineer the impossible. We will watch them fail, and we will see how the technology gap exposed in the skies over Korea would ultimately help bring down an empire. In Part 1, we watched a professor named Charles Stark Draper build an impossible machine in a cramped MIT laboratory. In Part 2, we saw him fight the military bureaucracy and prove his invention in the Nevada desert. The A-4 gunsight was deployed across Korea. American pilots were shooting down MiGs at ratios that seemed like fantasy. But across the Yalu River, Soviet intelligence had finally captured an intact gunsight. They had dragged it from the frozen mud and shipped it directly to Moscow. The secret was out. And now the real war was about to begin. Because when the Soviet engineers opened that black box and examined its contents, they did not find hope. They found terror. They found a technological gap so vast that it threatened to unravel everything they believed about their own industrial might. This was no longer a battle over Korea. This was a battle for the future of warfare itself. The crate arrives at the NII-17 Research Institute in Moscow in March 1953. Stalin is still alive, though barely. His paranoia has reached fever pitch. The losses in Korea are unacceptable. For every American Sabre shot down, the Soviets are losing 5, 6, sometimes 8 MiGs. The numbers are classified at the highest level, but the trend is undeniable. Something is very wrong. The Institute's best engineers gather in a sterile high-security laboratory. Armed guards stand at every door. This is the most important reverse engineering project since the atomic bomb. They pry open the crate with trembling hands. Inside, cushioned by American packing material, is the A-4 gunsight. It is damaged but intact. The recovery team had worked miracles to preserve it. Now it is time to dissect the American ghost. The lead engineer, a man named Viktor Kulikov, begins the autopsy. He removes the outer casing with surgical precision. He expects to find advanced electronics. Perhaps vacuum tubes arranged in some revolutionary configuration. Perhaps a miniaturized radar system beyond Soviet capabilities. What he finds instead leaves him speechless. The technology is not electronic. It is mechanical. Beautiful, precise, impossible mechanical engineering. At the heart of the device is a gyroscope, unlike anything Soviet industry has ever produced. It floats in a viscous fluid, suspended with tolerances measured in millionths of an inch. Kulikov places a component under a microscope. He adjusts the focus. He stares for a long moment. Then he calls his colleagues over. One by one they look. One by one their faces go pale. The shock is not that the technology is alien. The shock is that it is perfect. The clearances between moving parts are so fine that Soviet machine tools cannot even measure them accurately, let alone reproduce them. The fluid suspension is a chemical compound that Soviet laboratories have never synthesized. The wiring is woven with a delicacy that resembles jewelry, not military equipment. Kulikov writes his report that night. His hand shakes as he forms the words. The Americans have not won because of superior pilots. They have not won because of better tactics. They have won because they have better machinists. The gap is not years, it is decades. But the report that reaches Stalin's desk is sanitized. Nobody wants to deliver bad news to a dying dictator known for executing messengers. The summary claims that the device can be copied, that Soviet industry will soon produce equivalent systems, that the technological gap is manageable. It is a lie that will cost thousands of lives. The order comes down from the Kremlin. Copy the American Gunsight. Screw for screw, wire for wire. Soviet factories mobilize with the urgency of a wartime crash program. Engineers work 20-hour shifts. Resources are diverted from other projects. The copy is designated ASP-4 newtons. Within 6 months, the first prototypes roll off the assembly line. They look identical to the American original. They fit perfectly into the cockpits of MiG-15 and MiG-17 fighters. Soviet commanders are ecstatic. Finally, they will have the magic eye. Finally, the slaughter will end. The new gunsights are rushed to frontline units in Manchuria. Pilots receive them with desperate hope. They have been dying for 2 years. They have watched friends spiral into the Korean mountains killed by bullets that seemed to come from nowhere. Now they will have the same advantage as the Americans. The first combat tests are scheduled for September 1953. A squadron of MiG-17s, equipped with the ASP-4, engages a flight of American Sabres over the Yalu. The Soviet pilots dive on the Americans with renewed confidence. They lock their radar. The reticle appears on the glass. They fire. The shells miss by hundreds of feet. The pilots are confused. They try again. Again the shots go wide. The reticle is jumping, wandering. The radar signal fluctuates wildly. Under the heavy G-loads of combat maneuvering, the Soviet copies of Draper's gyroscopes are failing catastrophically. The fluid is impure. The tolerances are too loose. The delicate mechanism grinds against itself. By the time the pilots return to base, several have been shot down. The survivors are furious. The box is broken, they scream at the maintenance crews. It lies. It tells us we are on target when we are not. It is trying to kill us. The truth is devastating. Soviet industry has copied the shape of the technology, but not the soul. They can build a tractor. They cannot build a watch. Within weeks, pilots across the Soviet Air Force begin disabling their ASP-4 sights. They physically lock the gyroscopes in place, turning the advanced computer back into a simple crosshair. They go back to Kentucky windage. They go back to guessing. And they go back to dying. But this technical failure is not the only crisis brewing. Back in the United States, Draper faces a different kind of problem. The A4 is working too well. And that success has attracted attention from people who want to take credit for it. In Washington, defense contractors are circling like vultures. They see the kill ratios from Korea. They see the future of military aviation, and they want a piece of it. Lockheed, North American, and Boeing all begin lobbying to take over production of the Gunsight. They argue that MIT is an academic institution not equipped for military-scale manufacturing. They claim they can produce units faster, cheaper, better. The pressure on Draper becomes immense. Generals who once dismissed his invention now want to control it. Politicians demand testimony about production timelines and cost overruns. The simple act of building a better gunsight has become a political battlefield. Then, disaster strikes. In October 1953, a Sabre equipped with an early production A4 crashes during a training mission at Nellis Air Force Base. The pilot is killed. Investigation reveals a manufacturing defect. A single gyroscope bearing machined 0.001 inches out of tolerance caused the system to fail at a critical moment. The pilot trusted the gunsight. The gunsight lied. He flew into the ground believing he was on target. The incident makes headlines. Critics who opposed the technology from the beginning demand immediate suspension of the program. General Boyd, who had become a supporter after the Nevada tests, is forced to defend the system before a congressional committee. Is this machine safe, the senators demand? Are we killing our own pilots with defective equipment? For a brief moment, everything Draper has built threatens to collapse. The manufacturing tolerances required for the A4 are so extreme that even a tiny error can be fatal. Can American industry maintain that precision across thousands of units? The answer will be written not in committee rooms, but in the skies over Korea. November 18, 1953. The weather over MiG Alley is perfect. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, cold thin air at 35,000 feet. A formation of 16 F-86 F Sabres crosses the Yalu River on a fighter sweep. Their mission is simple: find MiGs, kill them. Leading the formation is Captain Harold Fisher, a man who will become one of the top aces of the war. His aircraft is equipped with the latest production A4 gunsight manufactured under the new quality control protocols implemented after the Nellis crash. Soviet radar has detected the Americans. A response is launched immediately. 24 MiG-17s scramble from bases in Manchuria. They climb rapidly, exploiting their superior altitude performance. They intend to use the same tactics that have worked before. Dive from above. Make a single pass. Climb back to safety. The two formations spot each other at 40,000 feet. The MiGs are higher as always. They have the energy advantage. They roll over and dive. Fisher watches them come. He can see the glint of sunlight on their swept wings. In the old days, this would be the moment of maximum danger. The MiGs would slash through the American formation guns blazing, then escape before anyone could respond. But today is different. Fisher calls the break. 16 Sabres scatter like a flock of birds, denying the MiGs concentrated targets. The Soviet pilots pick their victims and dive. The first MiG roars past Fisher's wingman cannons, thundering. The shots miss. The MiG pilot pulls up, beginning his climb to safety. He has done this 100 times. He knows the Sabre cannot follow. But Fisher is already turning. His A4 gunsight locks onto the climbing MiG. The radar feeds range data to the gyroscopic computer. The orange pipper drifts smoothly across the glass. Fisher does not try to calculate lead. He does not try to guess where the MiG will be. He simply follows the dot. The MiG is 1,800 feet away, then 1,500, then 1,200. The pilot is pulling hard, trading speed for altitude. He glances back. The Sabre is still there, still following, still pointing at him. For the first time, the Soviet pilot feels fear. The pipper settles. Fisher squeezes the trigger, a 2-second burst. 200 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition streak across the sky. The gun cameras record what happens next. The tracers do not arc behind the MiG as they would have with a conventional sight. They do not require the pilot to guess the lead angle. They fly in a straight line directly to where the MiG will be in 0.3 seconds. 47 rounds strike the fuselage. The MiG disintegrates. Across the sky, similar scenes are playing out. The Soviet tactics that relied on climbing to safety are failing. The A4 allows American pilots to engage targets in high G climbs that would have been impossible before. Shots that should miss by hundreds of feet are striking with surgical precision. The engagement lasts 11 minutes. When it ends, 11 MiGs have been destroyed. The Americans have lost 0 aircraft. The kill ratio for this single battle is infinite. Soviet pilots who survived the engagement return to base in shock. Their safe zone no longer exists. Their sanctuary in the sky has been violated. The Americans can hit them anywhere. News of the November 18th engagement spreads rapidly through both air forces. American pilots begin calling the A-4 the ace maker. Morale soars. Men who were afraid to fly now volunteer for combat missions. They trust the technology. They know that if they can see a MiG, they can kill it. The statistics tell the story. Before the widespread deployment of the A-4, American pilots achieved hit rates of approximately 2%. After deployment, that number climbs to 24%. A 12-fold improvement. Kill ratios that hovered around 2-to-1 climb to 5-to-1, then 8-to-1, then in some engagements infinity. The total impact is staggering. Military historians estimate that the A-4 Gunsight directly contributed to the destruction of over 400 enemy aircraft during the Korean War. More importantly, it saved the lives of hundreds of American pilots who would have been killed trying to achieve those kills with conventional sights. The Soviets are forced to completely abandon their offensive tactics. They stop aggressive patrolling over the Yalu. They retreat to defensive positions, only engaging when absolutely necessary. The MiG Alley that was supposed to be a graveyard for American bombers becomes a hunting ground for American fighters. Draper receives the National Medal of Science. His laboratory at MIT becomes the foundation for what will eventually be called the Draper Laboratory, one of the most important defense research institutions in American history. The technology he pioneered in that cramped Cambridge workshop will evolve into the guidance systems that land men on the moon, the targeting computers in every modern fighter jet, the smart bombs that can strike a target from 50 miles away. But the legacy extends beyond American shores. The failure of the Soviet ASP-4 copy sends shockwaves through the Kremlin. For the first time, Soviet leadership is forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. They can copy Western weapons, but they cannot copy Western precision. Their industrial base designed for mass production of simple, robust equipment is fundamentally incapable of matching American manufacturing quality. This realization will haunt them for the next 4 decades. They will pour billions of rubles into precision engineering programs. They will build entire secret cities dedicated to developing the machine tools needed to compete. And they will fail again and again, always one step behind. The technology gap exposed in MiG Alley will ultimately contribute to the economic collapse that brings down the Soviet Union in 1991. One gunsight. One spinning gyroscope. One professor who understood that the future of warfare belonged not to the biggest gun, but to the smartest computer. But what happened to the man who started it all? What became of Charles Stark Draper after his moment of triumph? The story of his later years is one that few people know. A story of greater inventions, bitter controversies, and a legacy that extends far beyond the frozen skies of Korea. In Part 4, we will follow Draper from the battlefields of Korea to the laboratories of NASA. We will see how his technology put men on the moon. And we will discover the final chapter of a life dedicated to solving the impossible. The war in Korea is ending. But the revolution that began with a floating gyroscope is just getting started. In Part 1, we watched a professor build a machine that could predict the future. In Part 2, we saw him fight the generals who called his invention useless. In Part 3, we witnessed that invention turn the tide of aerial warfare, sending Soviet pilots fleeing from the skies they once dominated. The A-4 Gunsight transformed average pilots into snipers. It achieved kill ratios that seemed like fantasy. It forced the Soviet Union to confront a technological gap that would haunt them for 4 decades. But through all of this, we have focused on the machine, on the battles, on the statistics. Now it is time to ask a different question. What happened to the man who started it all? What became of Charles Stark Draper after his moment of triumph? The answer is a story that few people know. A story of greater inventions, bitter controversies, and a legacy that extends far beyond the frozen skies of Korea. Because sometimes changing the world is not enough to earn the world's gratitude. The Korean War ends in July 1953 with an uneasy armistice. The guns fall silent over the Yalu River. The pilots go home. And Charles Stark Draper returns to his laboratory at MIT, expecting to continue his work in relative obscurity. He is wrong. The success of the A4 Gunsight has made him famous in military circles. The Pentagon comes calling with new projects, bigger budgets, and grander ambitions. But fame in Washington is a double-edged sword. The defense contractors who had tried to steal his invention during the war have not forgotten their defeat. They begin a quiet campaign to marginalize Draper and his laboratory. They whisper to generals that MIT is an academic institution not suited for serious military work. They lobby Congress to redirect funding to their own facilities. Draper finds himself fighting the same bureaucratic battles he thought he had won in 1952. The generals who once dismissed him now want to control him. The corporations that once ignored him now want to absorb him. He refuses. He insists on maintaining the independence of his laboratory. He believes that the best innovations come from small teams of dedicated researchers, not from sprawling corporate bureaucracies. This stubbornness makes him enemies. Powerful enemies. In 1959, the Air Force attempts to cancel funding for his next major project, a revolutionary inertial navigation system for ballistic missiles. They claim it is too expensive, too ambitious, too risky. Draper recognizes the pattern. It is the A4 fight all over again. He testifies before Congress. He demonstrates his prototypes. He calls in favors from pilots whose lives were saved by his Gunsight. And once again, he wins. The funding is restored. The project continues. But the battles have taken their toll. Draper is now in his 60s. His hair has gone white. The long nights in the laboratory have weakened his health. His wife complains that she sees him only at breakfast, and sometimes not even then. He has sacrificed his personal life on the altar of innovation. When colleagues ask if he regrets the cost, he gives the same answer every time. Every pilot who came home because of our work has a family. Every family that stayed whole is worth 1,000 of my sleepless nights. But the legacy of Charles Stark Draper would not be measured in gunsights alone. In 1961, President Kennedy announces that America will land a man on the moon before the decade is out. It is the most ambitious technological challenge in human history. And at the heart of that challenge is a problem that only one man in America has spent his career solving. Navigation. To reach the moon, the Apollo spacecraft will need to know exactly where it is at every moment. There is no GPS in 1961. There are no landmarks in the void of space. The spacecraft will travel 240,000 miles through absolute darkness and arrive at a target moving at 2,000 miles per hour. The margin of error is measured in fractions of a degree. A miscalculation of 0.1% means missing the moon entirely, drifting into the endless black forever. NASA turns to Draper. They ask him to build the Apollo guidance computer, the system that will navigate astronauts to the moon and back. It is the ultimate extension of everything he learned building the A4. The same principles that allowed a pilot to hit a MiG at 600 miles per hour will now guide a spacecraft across 250,000 miles of void. Draper accepts the challenge. His laboratory expands from a few dozen researchers to over 2,000 engineers and scientists. They work around the clock for 8 years. They invent new technologies. They solve problems that have never been solved before. The pressure is immense. The stakes are not just the lives of astronauts, but the prestige of America itself in the Cold War space race. On July 20th, 1969, the Apollo 11 lunar module descends toward the surface of the moon. The guidance computer that Draper's team built is making 50 calculations per second, adjusting the trajectory, managing the fuel consumption, guiding Neil Armstrong toward a safe landing site. When Armstrong speaks those famous words, "one small step for man," Charles Stark Draper is watching from Mission Control. He is 68 years old. Tears stream down his face. In that moment, the arc of his career reaches its apex. From the cramped laboratory where he built the first A4 prototypes to the surface of another world. The technology that once killed MiGs over Korea has now carried humanity to the stars. But even this triumph cannot protect him from the darker currents of history. The 1970s bring a new challenge. The Vietnam War has turned American public opinion against the military-industrial complex. Protesters march outside the gates of MIT demanding that the university sever its ties with defense research. They carry signs denouncing the merchants of death. They do not distinguish between different types of research. To them, Draper's laboratory is no different from the companies that make napalm and cluster bombs. The protests grow violent. Windows are smashed. Researchers receive death threats. In 1973, MIT makes a painful decision. To protect the university from further controversy, Draper's laboratory is spun off as an independent institution. It will retain the name Draper Laboratory, but it will no longer be part of MIT. For Draper, this separation is a wound that never fully heals. He has spent 40 years building that laboratory within the walls of his beloved university. Now he is cast out, not because he failed, but because he succeeded too well at building weapons. The irony is bitter. The same technology that saved American pilots in Korea, that landed men on the moon, that would eventually guide humanitarian aid missions and search and rescue operations, is now considered shameful by the very institution that gave it birth. Draper continues working until his health fails. He dies in 1987 at the age of 86. His obituary in the New York Times focuses on the Apollo mission. The A4 Gunsight that started it all receives only a passing mention. The thousands of pilots who came home because of his invention are not named. But the legacy of his work extends far beyond what any obituary could capture. Because the principles that Draper pioneered did not die with him. They evolved, they spread, they changed the world in ways that he never imagined. Today, every modern fighter jet carries a direct descendant of the A4 Gunsight. The F-35 Lightning II uses a system that calculates firing solutions using the same fundamental principles that Draper developed in 1950. The physics have not changed. Speed still kills accuracy. The human brain still cannot process information fast enough at supersonic speeds. But now, instead of floating gyroscopes and analog computers, the calculations are performed by digital processors running millions of operations per second. The accuracy has improved from 24% to over 90%. The ranges have extended from 2,000 feet to miles. But the core insight remains the same. Let the machine do the math. Let the pilot fly the plane. The applications have spread far beyond military aviation. The GPS satellite that guides your car uses inertial navigation systems derived from Draper's work. The autopilot that keeps commercial aircraft stable at 35,000 feet relies on floated gyroscopes that would be recognizable to his 1950 engineering team. The cruise missiles that can strike a target the size of a window from 1,000 miles away are the ultimate expression of his vision. Even in medicine, the principles of precision guidance have found application. Surgical robots that allow doctors to operate with superhuman precision owe a debt to the technology that Draper pioneered. The ability to hit a target that you cannot see, guided by machines that calculate faster than thought, has transformed not just warfare, but civilization itself. The numbers are staggering. Military historians estimate that the A4 Gunsight and its successors have saved over 10,000 American pilots since 1951. The guidance systems derived from Draper's work have contributed to every major American military operation for 70 years. The Apollo guidance computer he built has been cited as one of the foundational technologies of the computer revolution, a stepping stone between the room-sized mainframes of the 1960s and the smartphones we carry today. But perhaps the most important lesson is not about technology at all. The story of Charles Stark Draper is the story of every innovator who has ever faced the dead weight of institutional resistance. He was not a soldier. He was not a pilot. He was a professor who saw a problem that nobody else could solve and refused to accept that it was impossible. When the generals laughed at him, he built prototypes. When the bureaucrats cut his funding, he found new allies. When the corporations tried to steal his work, he fought back. And when the protesters called him a merchant of death, he continued working, knowing that the technology he created would save more lives than it took. This pattern repeats throughout history. The tank was dismissed as a useless toy by cavalry officers who believed that horses would always dominate the battlefield. Radar was rejected by admirals who trusted their lookouts more than their scientists. The atomic bomb was considered a theoretical fantasy until it ended World War II in a flash of nuclear fire. Every transformative military technology has faced the same resistance. The institutions that should embrace innovation are often the last to accept it. They are trapped by their experience, blinded by their expertise, convinced that the way things have always been done is the way things must always be done. It takes an outsider, someone who does not know the rules, someone who does not accept the limitations, to see the possibilities that everyone else has dismissed as impossible. Draper was that outsider. And the world changed because he refused to listen to the experts who told him it could not be done. There is one final detail that most histories of the A4 Gunsight omit. In 1995, 8 years after Draper's death, the Russian government declassified a trove of Soviet military documents from the Korean War era. Among them was a report from the NII-17 Research Institute dated November 1953. It was the final assessment of the captured American Gunsight, written after months of failed attempts to replicate the technology. The report concluded with a single sentence that Soviet leadership never allowed to be published during the Cold War. The American advantage in precision manufacturing represents a gap of approximately 25 years. At current rates of development, the Soviet Union cannot expect to achieve parity before 1978. They were optimistic. Soviet precision manufacturing never achieved full parity. The gap that Draper exposed with his spinning gyroscopes proved to be not just a military problem, but an economic death sentence. The same industrial base that could not build a reliable gunsight could not build reliable computers, reliable machine tools, reliable consumer electronics. The cascade of failures that began in MiG Alley ended in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. One gyroscope, one professor, one impossible idea. The threads of history connect in ways that no one can predict when the first stitch is made. From a cramped laboratory in Cambridge, a professor with a crazy idea built a machine that could see the future. That machine saved thousands of American pilots over Korea. Its descendants landed men on the moon. Its principles now guide everything from surgical robots to self-driving cars. Charles Stark Draper never fired a gun in combat. He never flew a fighter jet. He never set foot on a battlefield. But he changed the face of warfare more profoundly than any general or admiral of his generation. He proved that in the modern age, the most dangerous weapon is not the biggest bomb or the fastest plane. It is the smartest computer. And he proved that the greatest innovations often come not from the experts who know all the reasons something cannot work, but from the outsiders who are foolish enough to try anyway. If you know a similar story of impossible innovation that changed history, share it in the comments below. This is just one of hundreds of crazy ideas that transformed World War II and the Cold War that followed. Subscribe to discover more of the hidden histories that the textbooks often leave out. And remember, the next time someone tells you that your idea is impossible, that it cannot work, that you should give up and accept the way things have always been done. Think of Charles Stark Draper. Think of the floating gyroscope. Think of the ghost in MiG Alley. Because sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that change the world.